Hey everybody, my name is Ian. I work at the Fort Worth Public Library, and every second Saturday of the month, we have our Maker Showcase. This week, I have yet another interesting person. It seems like I have such wonderful people who come on the show. And today, I have another unusual maker, I guess I would consider it. Anyways, let me throw it over and say hello to Jenny.
Hey there, my name is Jenny Mathison-Foster, and I own Bay Willow Design, which is a hat studio. Hat
Excellent.
shop.
Excellent. Yeah, I don't think I really thought about a hat maker being a maker talent, but it definitely is. There's a lot of detail and a lot of parts to it. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how to make a hat and everything that goes into that?
Oh, great. Well, there's lots of different types of hats, but I will show you. The thing that got me interested in hats, partly I have a very small head, so I can't get a hat to fit me. And I had read an article about, oh gosh, it's over 20 plus years ago, about hat making. And the one thing that drew me in, which you can see all around me, are my hat blocks. And this is how you make a hat. Now I will say there's a hat behind me that's free-formed, but most hats are made over a hat block and mostly are wood. This was an antique hat block from the probably 1940s, 1950s.
Wow, that's I didn't even think about like all the different things that go into forming the different hats that we have. Now, granted, I don't look very good in hats, so I typically don't wear hats. But
I haven't found the right hat for you. That's why.
You're probably right. You're absolutely right on that. But tell us a little bit more about this hat form in front of you.
So this one's vintage, and this is one of my more unusual ones. And I will say too, the reason I have so many, each block is an actual size. So if I was making just a regular men's fedora hat, I need multiple sizes because we're all different sizes. This being a hat from the 40s, it actually ends up being this cute little number here, which probably been, whoops, I forgot I have a headband on, would have been worn in the back of the head, but I like it kind of tipped to the front. And what I was saying it's unusual is that if you see this, I always feel like it looks like a shoe, and this is what it creates. Most blocks look like the hat they're creating. This one is unusual in that it has different parts to it. So they got three different parts. This is actually the bill or the front of the hat. We got the back here and the crown of it. These don't come with instructions, so it's a matter of just looking at it and going, okay, why is this here? There's these lines right through here. They actually are rope lines. When I block over it, I'm taking felt and I'm using steam to soften it and to form it into this form. And then I use ropes around all these different shapes, but then also these are unusual. And there's a reason for those. I don't think you can see it here, but you can actually see where the rope lines are. And that's actually where the pieces line up on the hat. So the pattern is there. You just have to find it to know where everything's supposed to go.
Wow, that's so.
This is unusual. So I pulled the unusual one, but it's
absolutely
kind of, yeah.
That's so cool, and I love it's basically like an instruction manual built into the block.
Well, and this one, the other thing that's unusual about this is once I blocked over it and I have it all roped off and I let it dry. For me to take it off the block, I would have to pull it and basically destroy my shape. So what you end up doing is putting these things upside down. This actually has a couple of little things on it, and you're pulling out the middle section of the block, and then all the other little pieces come out. And so you can take, in good form, you can take your piece here, felt off of the hat, off the block, and it's still in good shape, and you haven't ruined it.
That's amazing.
All that time, you don't want to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. You've worked so hard to create it and spend time working on it, and then have to destroy it in order to get it off. Man, that would be a pain.
Yeah.
Wow, that's so interesting. Okay, so this one's more unusual. You have more regular ones.
Yeah, we do. Well, I recognize this shape, a nice fedora crown.
Yeah.
So then this is the crown, and then you also need the brim on it. And so that you can usually block them in one or like all in one, such as a block of thing I blocked here. You can block it all in one. You can see where the crown is here, the crown block's here, and then there's a brim block here. But you can do them separately also, and then sew the crown and the brim together.
That's so
You
fascinating.
can make it different colors, or you can experiment that way.
I'll be honest with you, I didn't think about how much goes into making hats, and it's so incredibly, I mean, there's so many different options with it, and that's so cool. Now, as you've kind of been exploring, how did you talked slightly a little bit about it, but how did you get started? Like, what really got you into making hats?
Well, I my background is in design and art history. I have a double major. I ended up actually working for a large housewares company in Chicago, Creighton Valley. You may have heard of it. I worked there for 20 plus years as a store designer in the store, and also at corporate in Chicago. And so I have that creative background. So this is just one more thing that it kind of struck that creative nerve in me. And once I started taking classes, which I will say 20 years ago, it was very difficult to find a class. It just hit me, and I ended up going with it, and, and I've been doing it ever since.
And here you are now.
Yeah.
That's so cool and very interesting. I definitely, so you kind of, it sounds like your degree kind of led you into this. Is that what you were hoping to start with?
No, I actually thought I was going to, I wanted to design fabrics. I even spent a year in Finland weaving and learning the whole thing. And yeah, it's just interesting where the path it takes you.
Absolutely, yeah. Are there things that have inspired you or really like sent you down that path that you, I mean, obviously working in the industry has kind of done that, but are there things that in your normal day-to-day life that inspire you?
Oh, that's interesting. I just think, well, for one thing, here in the US, we're starting to wear hats more. And so it's kind of fun that more people are out wearing hats. And so that just like pushes me to like get more people on hats. There's lots of events that people go to, and we're just getting way more. It's fun to see people go in and wear hats again.
Yeah,
Oh,
absolutely.
that was a good answer. I'm sorry.
No, it's good. It's fine. It's totally fine. If you want to jump back, we can. If you want to move forward.
I don't know if that inspires me. What inspires me actually is more seeing what is, especially this last year with COVID, seeing all the different things that people are doing. And I've been able to take Zoom classes with milliners that, in Australia. I mean, I would love to go to Australia and work with them, but they're master milliners that I can go to. Oftentimes it's at like 4 a.m. It's a little early, but we can take a class together and learn some really cool new techniques that are, I mean, it's just amazing what people are doing out there. I think COVID just kind of like spurred everybody on. So it's been fun just this last year being able to take classes and learn new techniques with different materials that I normally don't work with.
Yeah, very much so. I think that's kind of been the silver lining, especially with some of my guests on the show, is that COVID it's been very hard for a lot of people, but it's also been very inspiring for a lot of people as well, being able to take these classes. I know I took a quilting class online via Zoom with somebody that I would never have the chance to meet because they live in England. I would not be able to meet them and take their class. So being able to take that quilt class for me has been pretty awesome, even with everything so crazy. So yeah.
Well, and I'm hoping it continues. Again, I mean, I have traveled. I've traveled to the south of France to work with a milliner, and when we all could travel more. And I would still like to do that. But if I can take a quick Zoom class, or actually usually not quick, they're usually over 5 days. But if I can do that in my own studio, that's wonderful. And I hope people still continue doing that because it's cheaper. I don't have to travel. So I would love to go and see them too.
Yeah, no, that's really awesome. Now, as you're creating hats, a lot of times when I'm creating a project, I enjoy quilting. When I create a quilt, a lot of times no two quilts are ever the same. Does that go for hats as well?
No, I try. Well, I do have some hats that I will try to keep a stock on. But you're right. I mean, I would say no, most of my hats are a little bit slightly different. Even if I'm trying to do the same hat, it is going to be slightly different because you're working with materials that sometimes, like, you're using steam usually to form your material. And sometimes it's, it could be really rainy outside, so everything is more malleable, but it could be a dry day, and it's really hard to get the material to move the way you want it to move. So they're never going to work the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't even think about the weather playing such an effect in making hats. There's been a lot of history with hats. I know also as a theater major, one of the things that I had to study was costume design, and we had to be very careful with what we were selecting for shows. And there's a lot of history that goes along with hats as well. Do you take that in mind whenever you're creating your hats?
Well, I don't do a lot of period hats, if that's what you're asking.
That's fair.
No, because it's a lot. There are milliners out there that do very much a period hat. Though I do have most of my vintage hat blocks are from the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and I will take something like that and I might, push it more modern. Although I have customers that want to dress in more 50s outfit because it's vintage, and so we'll go a little bit more true to that. But it's kind of fun to take them and then push them to what we're doing now.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what I like to do.
Yeah, no, totally, absolutely. Are there people, you talked a little bit about being able to take classes from around the world. Are there people that have inspired you?
Oh, yes. I mean, there's several like British milliners that I absolutely love. There's Phil Tracy, Stephen Jones, there's Rachel Trevor Morgan, who does a lot of hats with me. They're amazing. There's some amazing also Australian milliners that I absolutely love, that are just their techniques and just the creativity and pushing new materials has been what inspires me.
That's awesome. That's really cool. I mean, just in the few behind you, there are a lot of different materials that I see there. What type of materials do you usually use?
Well, of course, winter we tend to use felt. I tend to use a fur felt, which come in a couple different shapes, which actually these also almost look like a hat in a way, though they haven't been stiffened or anything. This is called a capeline. Some people call it a flare. And then there's this little bit smaller called a hood. And so you can make a smaller hat, which is what this little hat, we use a hood to make that. Like I said, I use 100% fur felt. I use rabbit. I tend not to go with the beaver, partly because there's a price point they're very expensive. So I do stick with this. You can get felt wool. It's harder to work with. The fur felt just kind of melts into a block, and it's so much easier to work with and much richer feeling to it. Straws, there's a huge variety. And I just dropped my straws on the floor. Okay, sorry.
You so good.
Off here. And they come in all different types of material. This one's a knotted sisal. This is a parasisal. There's even, this is called cineme, which comes in a roll like fabric. These are the ones, this material you use oftentimes in the real fancy derby, Kentucky Derby hats. This material is actually new to millinery, 20 plus years ago. It was actually, and this has been dyed and stiffened. In its natural state, it's more flowy. And I think it was Stephen Jones discovered it when he was on a trip to Japan, and they were using it in the flower market to tie up their flowers. And of course, he looked at it like a milliner and said, this could make a hat. And now it has become like the go-to material for the fancy hats.
That's awesome. That's really cool.
But I will say, these are all hand woven too. And which is the good thing about cineme, yes, it's hand woven, but you can also get machine made. The straws like this are all hand woven. And because a lot of people are aging out of it and not taking up the craft, the quality is starting to go down too. So it's really hard to find a beautiful quality in some of these nice, like this one, this parasisal is a beautiful quality, whereas this one's not as nice a quality. So that's one of the tough things about millinery, that it's kind of frustrating right now. But then we're finding new materials that we can use in, like I said, the cineme. It creates beautiful, actually that burgundy hat behind me is in cineme.
That's really cool. And and depending on the material, I'm assuming it can take different lengths to make a hat.
Yeah. And so like the cineme hat, I keep on putting the wrong way. The cineme hat takes a lot longer. And I'm using 3 layers. I have to block the crown and the brim separately because the material is a flat material and it's kind of hard actually to get that crown shape to make it perfectly without folds on it. And so then it has a very rough edge to it. So every edge basically has to be covered. The brim of the hat, usually you're wiring it and then you have to cover the wire. And of course you're sewing the hat and the crown together. But they do create the prettiest little hat. So that's an actually big hat.
Yeah, definitely. I think
that's yeah, and that one's the one that takes the most work though. That purple hat behind me, that one is freeform, and it's taking a parasisal and just freeforming it and sewing wires into to create this real flowy little hat or swirly hat.
That's cool. Very awesome. Wow.
One thing I hate when people walk into my studio, they're like, "Oh, hat's a dying art. Hat making's a dying art."
Oh.
And that's the one thing it just drives me up the wall when people say that. I'm like, yes, there's not a lot of us around, though we are now a growing community. But if you go over to Europe, go over to Asia, and there's a lot more milliners out there, and they of course have more of a tradition of wearing a hat. And I think I will say also that right now with the US, we're getting more so into wearing hats. Meghan and Harry's wedding really helped my business.
Oh yeah.
More and more people going to weddings will say, if it's an afternoon one especially, will wear a hat. So that's wonderful. Or even going to a special event. You can, it could be like an afternoon tea or whatever, and they will want a hat for it. Also, I'm noticing that the like 20 somethings, 30 somethings, which is great for me. They love like a floppy hat, which there's right back there is kind of one that's a Western weight. So it has a real heavy duty brim to it, but that's their go-to hat. And I love it because to me, then they'll slowly graduate into the other hats.
There you go. Absolutely. Now here's a really important, this is going to be groundbreaking question for you. Is a Fascinator a hat?
Oh, that's a good question. I call it a hat, but yeah, you wear it differently than a hat because it's like a little thing that's perched on your head. Even the bigger ones, I hate this term, that if they're a little bit bigger than like say a 4-inch size or whatever, they'll call them hatinators. And somehow I don't like that term. I still want to call it a fascinator. But they're still in art. I still make them. I'm a hat maker, so I'm going to call them a hat. But they're for fun.
Absolutely. I just like the term fascinator. Like that makes me laugh.
And I'll say it's been around for a long time. So think of, I've always read that like in Marie Antoinette's time, of course she had a huge wig on, but she put a feather in her hat and that feather was the fascinator. And it's just gradually grown from there. So it's not like a new thing. A lot of people think it's a very new thing because they think of like the royal weddings and everybody wearing their fascinators. It's been around for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really cool. It's so fun to learn the history, and like I said, doing theater was really interesting, finding out the reasons for why you would wear certain items or what, how it would change over the period of time as well. So it's always fascinating to learn these things.
Well, I will say I've also worked with a lot of milliners that work in the theater, and they will also, the structure of their hats tend to be a little different than I'm making them because I have to make them last for production, whereas I am making it for, it might be 2 or 3 times a year they're wearing that hat. But they're fun to work with because they love to experiment with things. They will take whatever scrap is sitting around and figure out what to do with it. So they're a great group to work with. I love working with them.
Absolutely, and having worked in the theater a little bit, I also I find it funny because sometimes as a designer, you will purposely hide little elements or little things, especially as a lighting designer. I would hide, a certain type of light or hide a certain color of light somewhere in the show just to figure out if I can do it. But I know some costume designers who would figure out little ways to hide certain elements on their costumes.
Yeah, I like that. I might have to figure out something I can do with that.
There you go. It's an idea to work with, right? Well, it's been wonderful talking to you, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today. Where can people find you online?
Oh, so I do have a website, www.baywillowdesign.com, but I'm also on Instagram and Facebook. And I think you just put in Bay Willow Design, you will find it.
Awesome. Jenny, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
This was wonderful. Thank you so much for visiting my studio.
Absolutely. It's so great. I enjoy it. And I'm gonna have to come by your studio and see if I can find a hat that works for you.
We'll get a hat on you and we'll figure out the right hat for you.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, thank you. And we'll see you guys next time. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.